He was a military visionary who built an empire that would defy the British. But he never lived to see it. Because on a bloody September day in 1828, the most powerful man in Africa wasn't brought down by a foreign army, but by his own family and the men he trusted most. This is the story of how Shaka Zulu's tyrannical grief led directly to his own assassination. He forged a kingdom from a handful of scattered clans, completely revolutionizing warfare and creating a society built on absolute discipline. He's been called the Black Napoleon, a strategist whose genius reshaped the entire map of southern Africa. But the same mind that conceived of the devastating horns of the buffalo formation, a tactic that simply annihilated his enemies, would eventually turn that same ferocity inward on his own people. The story of Shaka Zulu isn't just about a great warrior king. It's a dark and complex tragedy of power, paranoia, and betrayal. It's the story of a brilliant nation-builder's descent into a bloodthirsty tyrant. A fall so profound that it left those closest to him with a terrible choice. Kill the king or watch the kingdom die. This is the full story of the plot, the players, and the bloody day his reign was ended by a conspiracy born of fear and ambition. Before we move forward, I have to say this. This is all about the narration of African history, and if you are into that, consider subscribing. Okay, now back to the story. Before the tyrant, there was the outcast. Shaka's story begins not in a palace but in exile. Born around 1787, he was the illegitimate son of Senzangakona, chief of the small Zulu clan, and a woman named Nandi. Their relationship violated tribal customs, and the result was a childhood of constant humiliation for both mother and son. They were driven from Senzangakona's home, forced to wander and seek refuge only to be treated as outcasts. This life of torment forged in Shaka a will of iron and a burning resentment that would fuel both his meteoric rise and his brutal downfall. As a young man, Shaka found a place where his aggression was an asset. He was conscripted into the army of Dingiswayo, the powerful chief of the Mthethwa. Dingiswayo was a visionary himself and saw in the intense young warrior an extraordinary raw potential. Shaka was tall, powerful, and saw warfare not as a ritual, but as a science of total annihilation. Under Dingiswayo's mentorship, Shaka rocketed through the ranks. He wasn't just following military doctrine. He was rewriting it. And it was here that the Zulu war machine was first forged. Shaka looked at traditional fighting, mostly throwing light spears or assegais from a distance, and saw a waste of time. Victory, he reasoned, lay in brutal close-quarters combat. He introduced a weapon that would become a revolutionary symbol. The ikawa, a short, broad-bladed stabbing spear. It was supposedly named for the sucking sound it made when pulled from a human body. To use it, you had to be close enough to see the terror in your enemy's eyes. He paired this with a larger, heavier cowhide shield, which wasn't just for defense. Warriors used it to hook their opponent's shield, wrench it aside, and open them up for the fatal thrust of the ikawa. But the weapons were just one part of his revolution. He reorganized the entire army into disciplined regiments called Mbopha, grouped by age. He subjected them to a hellish training regimen, forcing them to run for miles barefoot over thorny ground to toughen their feet. He famously forbade his warriors from marrying until they had washed their spears in blood, keeping a massive aggressive army in a constant state of readiness. Cowardice was punishable by immediate death. A warrior who came back from battle with a wound in his back was clearly running away and was executed on the spot. His tactical genius was perfectly captured in the horns of the buffalo formation. The army was split into three parts. The strong center, the chest, would hit the enemy head-on and pin them. Then two faster flanks, the horns, would race around the sides, encircling and wiping out the trapped force. A fourth group, the loins, was held in reserve to plug any gaps or hunt down any survivors. It was devastatingly effective, turning battles into systematic slaughters. When his father died around 1816, Shaka, with Dingiswayo's military backing, marched on the Zulu clan, assassinated his half-brother who'd taken the throne, and declared himself chief. He was still technically under Dingiswayo, but fate intervened. When Dingiswayo was ambushed and killed by his arch-rival, Zwide, the Confederacy fell apart. Shaka stepped into the power vacuum, absorbed the Mthethwa forces into his own, and turned his perfected army towards Zwide. The clash between Shaka Zulus and Zwide's Nwandwa was a struggle for total supremacy. Despite being outnumbered, Shaka's superior tactics proved decisive. As a final act of vengeance for his mentor's death, Shaka reportedly tracked down Zwide's mother, a reputed witch. Legend has it he locked her in a hut with starving jackals, and after they were done, he burned the hut to the ground. With his rivals either destroyed or absorbed, Shaka was the undisputed master of the region. His conquests kicked off a period of chaos and mass migration known as the Mphikane, or the crushing, as terrified tribes fled his armies in a violent domino effect that reshaped the subcontinent. The devastation was undeniable. By the mid-1820s, Shaka ruled 250,000 people and commanded an army of over 50,000 warriors. But this empire was built on fear, and its architect was about to suffer a loss that would crack his mind and unleash a terror his people had never seen. For a man who inspired so much terror, there was one person to whom Shaka showed unwavering devotion: his mother, Nandi. They had endured humiliation and exile together, and his rise to power was her vindication. He made her the Queen Mother, his most trusted advisor, and perhaps the only person who could temper his volcanic rages. She was his tether to humanity. In October 1827, that tether snapped. Nandi died, likely from dysentery. For Shaka, this wasn't just the loss of a mother. It was the collapse of his world. The grief that overtook him wasn't quiet sorrow. It was a cataclysmic madness that would drag his entire kingdom into a nightmare. He seemed to believe his personal agony had to be shared by all, that the entire universe must be forced to suffer with him. The death of Nandi was the moment Shaka, the brilliant strategist, began his final horrifying descent into Shaka, the bloody tyrant. His grief became a state-mandated reign of terror. The months that followed were marked by increasingly deranged decrees. Shaka ordered a year of official mourning. During this time, no crops could be planted, a death sentence for an agricultural society, guaranteeing widespread famine. He also forbade the use of milk, a staple of the Zulu diet. His logic, if you can call it that, was as cruel as it was insane. He ordered cows to be slaughtered so their calves would know what it felt like to lose a mother. The bellowing of starving calves, he declared, would be a fitting soundtrack for the nation's grief. His cruelty turned on his own people with a ferocity that was shocking even for him. At Nandi's funeral, a wave of mass hysteria, likely fueled by sheer terror of the king, swept through the crowd. Anyone deemed insufficiently sorrowful in Shaka's eyes was immediately executed. Some sources claim that as many as 7,000 people were killed that day, speared for not crying hard enough. The tyranny didn't stop there. He declared that all sexual relations were forbidden for the year of mourning. Any woman who became pregnant was executed along with her husband. The kingdom was plunged into an atmosphere of suffocating fear. This wasn't the calculated ruthlessness of a military commander anymore. This was the unhinged cruelty of a broken man. His behavior made it terrifyingly clear to those around him that he was mentally unstable, a danger to the very survival of the Zulu nation. For the chiefs and even Shaka's own family, a horrifying realization began to dawn. The founder of their kingdom had become its greatest threat. While Shaka was lost in his tyrannical grief, A rebellion was quietly taking shape in the shadows of his own royal kraal. This wasn't a foreign plot. It was an inside job. A palace coup cooked up by the very men who should have been his most loyal supporters. His half-brothers Dingane and Mhlangana and his trusted personal attendant, the high-ranking Induna, Mbopha kaSithayi. Dingane and Mhlangana had always lived in their half-brother's shadow. As legitimate sons of the former chief, they likely felt a deep-seated resentment toward the illegitimate son who had seized the throne. Ambition was a huge motivator. Killing Shaka was their only real path to power. But it was probably more complicated than that. They were watching the kingdom he built crumble under his madness. The famine, the slaughter of cattle, the mass executions. This wasn't sustainable. They could tell themselves and others that this was a political necessity. They weren't just killing a brother. They were saving the kingdom from an insane king. But the real linchpin of the conspiracy was Mbopha. His betrayal was the most shocking. Mbopha wasn't just a servant. He was a high-ranking official who had the king's complete trust. So why would a man in his position risk everything? Historical records are thin, but we can guess. Mbopha had a front-row seat to Shaka's growing cruelty. He would have seen the executions and smelled the fear. Under Shaka, loyalty was no longer a guarantee of safety. Some historians believe he was nudged by Shaka's powerful aunt, Mbopha, a shrewd political operator who may have seen Shaka's madness as a threat to the royal family. Whatever his reason, Mbopha's involvement was critical. He was the ultimate insider, the one who could give the assassins the access they desperately needed. The conspirators had tried to kill Shaka before and failed, either losing their nerve or the opportunity. They knew a direct fight was suicide. Even now, they needed the perfect moment. That moment came in September 1828. Shaka had dispatched the bulk of the Zulu army on another massive campaign, this time far to the north. This impulsive decision left his capital, KwaDokuza, dangerously exposed. The regiments that served as his shield were hundreds of miles away. For Dingane, Mhlangana, and Mbopha, this was the chance they'd been waiting for. The lion was in his den, but his claws, the Zulu army, had been sent away. There would never be a better time to strike. On or around September 22, 1828, the royal kraal of KwaDokuza was deceptively calm. With the main army away, the usual thrum of thousands of warriors was gone. King Shaka was holding court, reportedly meeting with envoys from the Amapondo people who had come to pay tribute. He sat on a rock in the great cattle enclosure, surrounded by a few attendants. He was relaxed, unguarded, and completely unaware that the real threat was moving in the periphery. Dingane and Mhlangana lurked nearby, armed and waiting for the signal. Their plan hinged on creating a distraction, and that was Mbopha's job. Accounts of what happened next vary, pieced together from oral traditions. But the core story is chillingly consistent. As Shaka dealt with the petitioners, Mbopha made his move. He approached the group and in a fake fit of anger started yelling at the visitors, creating a scene and chastising them for bothering the king. Shaka, distracted, turned to his trusted servant, supposedly asking him what all the commotion was about. That was the moment. As Shaka's attention was diverted, Dingane and Mhlangana exploded from their hiding spots. They weren't brothers anymore. They were assassins. They moved fast, closing the distance to the seated king. The first spear struck, then the second. The short, lethal blades of the Ikawa, the very weapon Shaka had perfected, plunged into his body. The shock and betrayal of his final moments are captured in the last words often attributed to him. He looked at his assassins, his own family, and cried out, "Are you stabbing me, kings of the earth?" It was a question dripping with disbelief. Another, more prophetic version of his last words is also famous. In this telling, he looked past his brothers and uttered a chilling warning. "You kill me thinking you will rule, but it will be the swallows who will rule." The swallows was a reference to the white settlers who built their houses from mud like the birds. It was a prophecy that his brothers wouldn't inherit the kingdom, but that a foreign power would ultimately take it all. Whether he actually said these words or they were added later, they captured a profound truth about the future of southern Africa. The attack was swift and brutal. King Shaka slumped to the ground in the dust of his own kraal. There was no grand funeral, no state mourning for the man who demanded the world grieve for his mother. The conspirators acted quickly, dumping Shaka's body into an empty grain pit. They filled the pit with stones and mud, creating an unmarked, dishonorable grave. To this day, the exact location of Shaka Zulu's body is unknown, though a monument stands at a supposed site. The founder of the Zulu nation had been erased. The lion was dead. Shaka's death sent immediate shock waves through the kingdom. The first order of business for the assassins, more murder. The alliance between Dingane and Mhlangana didn't last long. Dingane proving just as ruthless as his brother quickly had Mhlangana killed. Mbopha the traitorous servant likely met a similar fate as Dingane ruthlessly eliminated anyone who shared his guilt. Dingane then declared himself the new king. He immediately reversed Shaka's most hated policies. He let warriors marry, ended the forced mourning, and allowed people to plant crops again, quickly winning over the army and the public. But his rule was built on murder, and he launched a brutal purge, hunting down and executing anyone still loyal to Shaka. He ruled by fear, but he lacked Shaka's strategic genius. The Zulu kingdom survived, but its era of unstoppable expansion was over. Dingane's reign was defined by a new challenge. The arrival of the Voortrekkers, Boer settlers moving inland. The clash was bloody. In 1838, Dingane had the Voortrekker leader Piet Retief and his entire delegation of about 100 men executed during negotiations. This sparked a furious retaliation. Later that year, at the Battle of Blood River, a small, well-armed Voortrekker force crushed Dingane's army. An estimated 3,000 Zulu warriors were killed. This defeat shattered Dingane's power. His own half-brother, Mbopha, whom Dingane had spared, thinking he was harmless, allied with the Boers and overthrew him. Dingane fled and was eventually killed as a fugitive. The Zulu kingdom would continue, but it was now caught between competing colonial powers. Shaka's prophecy of the swallows was coming true. The empire he forged would ultimately fall to the British in the Anglo-Zulu War of 1879, just over 50 years after his death. So what is the legacy of Shaka Zulu? Is he a heroic nation builder, a symbol of African pride and strength, or was he a bloodthirsty tyrant whose wars and purges brought untold suffering? The truth is he was both. He was a military genius on par with any in history. A visionary who built a nation with brutal focus. He was also a paranoid dictator whose unchecked power festered into a madness that terrified his people. His life is a testament to the idea that the same qualities that build empires, ambition, ruthlessness, and an unbreakable will can also be the tools of their destruction. His assassination wasn't just the end of a king. It was the tragic, bloody, an inevitable conclusion to the story of a man whose greatness was matched only by his own tyranny. Shaka Zulu's legacy is still fiercely debated. Was he a hero, a villain, or something far more complex? Let us know what you think in the comments below. And if you want more incredible and brutal stories from history, make sure to like this video and subscribe. The story of Shaka's assassination is a stark reminder that even the most powerful rulers can be undone from within. The king who conquered armies fell to just 3 men armed with spears and grievances in the heart of his own capital. The betrayal by his brothers was the culmination of a reign that had become unsustainable. His genius had curdled into tyranny. His grief into a madness that threatened the existence of the very kingdom he created. His death marked the end of an era of Zulu dominance, and the beginning of a new chapter of conflict for all of southern Africa. It's a timeless, tragic tale of how power corrupts and how even the greatest of kings can be laid low by the consequences of their own actions.